Long before the borders of modern Nigeria were drawn on a map in London, the land surrounding the Niger River was a mosaic of immense wealth and power. In the south, the Oyo Empire and the Benin Kingdom built complex societies rich in art, trade, and military strategy. In the east, the Igbo operated highly democratic, decentralized societies heavily involved in agriculture and regional commerce. But in the north, a massive transformation occurred at the dawn of the 19th century. The Fulani people, originally nomadic pastoralists migrating from the Senegambia region of West Africa, had settled among the Hausa kingdoms. They were highly educated, deeply devout Islamic scholars and cattle rearers. In 1804, a Fulani Islamic scholar named Usman dan Fodio declared a holy war, or jihad, against the Hausa kings, whom he accused of corrupting Islam. The Fulani cavalry swept across the savannah, conquering the ancient Hausa city-states and establishing the Sokoto Caliphate, an incredibly powerful and wealthy Islamic empire that stretched across the entire northern region. The Fulani did not just invade, they integrated, intermarried, and became the ruling aristocratic class of the north, establishing a deeply conservative, centralized system of administration. While the north was consolidated by the caliphate, a different kind of empire was approaching from the sea. The British did not enter Nigeria by accident, nor did they initially come to govern. They came for profit. In the mid-19th century, the Industrial Revolution in Europe required massive amounts of lubrication for factory machines, and the Niger Delta was the world's largest producer of palm oil. Initially, British merchants operated through gunboat diplomacy, violently forcing local chiefs to trade exclusively with them. In 1861, under the guise of stopping the transatlantic slave trade, British warships bombarded Lagos and annexed it as a crown colony. Soon after, a ruthless British businessman named George Goldie consolidated the regional palm oil trade into a massive private corporation called the Royal Niger Company. Armed with heavily equipped mercenary armies, this private company conquered southern territories, signing deceitful treaties with local kings to steal their land and resources. Eventually, the British government bought out the Royal Niger Company, taking direct imperial control of the vast territories. By the dawn of the 20th century, the British possessed two separate entities, the Northern Protectorate and the Southern Protectorate. But what would they call this massive acquisition? The answer came from a British journalist. In 1897, a woman named Flora Shaw, the colonial editor for the Times of London, wrote an article suggesting that the disparate territories around the Great River be collectively referred to as Nigeria, simply meaning Niger area. Flora Shaw was not merely a journalist, she was the romantic partner and eventually the wife of Lord Lugard, the ambitious British soldier appointed to manage the territories. Lord Lugard faced a massive problem. The British Treasury was tired of funding the Northern Protectorate, which was massive, landlocked, and operating at a severe financial deficit. Meanwhile, the Southern Protectorate, with its bustling coastal trade and rich cash crops, was generating a massive financial surplus. Lord Lugard's solution was purely economic. On January 1, 1914, in a quiet administrative center in Zungeru, Niger State, Lugard signed the document of Amalgamation. He forcibly merged the rich, predominantly Christian South with the vast Islamic North into a single country. The economic blueprint of Nigeria was thus established. The wealth of the South would be used to subsidize the administrative costs of the North. It was a marriage of British administrative convenience, laying the foundation for a century of bitter economic and ethnic resentment. Over the next few decades, the seeds of economic destruction were quietly sown. While the British exported thousands of tons of cocoa, groundnuts, coal, and tin, building a massive rail network strictly designed to extract wealth to the coast, they invested almost nothing in the human capital of the nation. By the time Nigerian intellectuals began fighting for independence after the Second World War, the economy was strictly an extraction machine. The fight for independence was not fought with bullets, but with fiery journalism, labor strikes, and intense political negotiations. Three towering figures emerged, representing the three distinct regions. In the East, Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, an American-educated intellectual, led the NCNC, championing a Pan-African vision. In the West, Chief Obafemi Awolowo, a brilliant London-trained lawyer, formed the Action Group, determined to build a progressive, welfare-driven state for the Yoruba people. In the North, Sir Ahmadu Bello, the Sardauna of Sokoto, and a direct descendant of Usman dan Fodio, led the Northern People's Congress, or NPC. Bello's primary goal was to protect the Islamic North from being culturally and economically dominated by the highly educated Southerners. When the British finally agreed to grant independence, the 1959 federal elections determined who would rule the new nation. Because the British had heavily favored the North in census allocations, the Northern region held a structural majority of parliamentary seats. The NPC won the most seats, but not an absolute majority, forcing them into a political alliance with Azikiwe's NCNC. Ahmadu Bello, as the supreme leader of the North, had no interest in moving to Lagos to govern a complex secular nation. He preferred to remain in Kaduna as the premier of the northern region. Instead, he sent his trusted deputy, a humble, golden-voiced schoolteacher named Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, to Lagos to become the first prime minister of a free Nigeria. Azikiwe accepted the ceremonial role of governor-general and eventually president. Chief Obafemi Awolowo became the official leader of the opposition. On October 1, 1960, Nigeria became independent, heralded as the wealthiest and most promising black nation on earth. But within 2 years, the political fabric began to tear, starting in the West. Chief Awolowo, having moved to the federal parliament in Lagos, left his regional deputy, Chief Samuel Ladoke Akintola, to serve as the premier of the Western region. It was a disastrous mismatch. Awolowo was a strict ideological purist who despised the northern-led federal government. Akintola was a pragmatic, highly ambitious politician who believed the Yoruba people were losing out on federal wealth by staying in the opposition, and he wanted to form an alliance with the North. This ideological rift exploded into open warfare in 1962. Awolowo tried to have Akintola removed from office. In response, massive riots broke out on the floor of the Western House of Assembly, with lawmakers breaking chairs over each other's heads. The federal government seized the opportunity to destroy the Western opposition. They declared a state of emergency, allied with Akintola, and arrested Chief Awolowo, sentencing him to 10 years in prison on highly controversial charges of treason. With Awolowo in jail, Akintola completely took over the West, ruling with an iron fist. By the 1965 regional elections, the West was a powder keg. Akintola's party shamelessly rigged the ballots to maintain power. The civilian population had had enough. The Yoruba people rose up in a violent rebellion known as Operation Weti. Political opponents, their houses and their vehicles were soaked in petrol and set completely on fire. The federal government under Prime Minister Balewa refused to send the military to stop Akintola's reign of terror, focusing instead on consolidating northern power. The country was drowning in corruption, electoral fraud, and absolute chaos. Watching from the military barracks was a group of brilliant, highly radicalized young army officers. These men were not uneducated thugs. They were elite, Sandhurst-trained intellectuals who read Marxist literature and viewed the politicians as corrupt parasites destroying the wealthy nation. The undisputed leader of this group was Major Chukwuma Kaduna Nzeogu, the brilliant chief instructor at the Nigerian Military Training College. He was joined by Major Emmanuel Ifeajuna, a former Commonwealth Games gold medalist who had become a brigade major in Lagos, and Major Adewale Ademoyega, a university graduate with a degree in history. For months, while carrying out their regular military duties, they secretly plotted to overthrow the government, execute the corrupt politicians, and install a pure, disciplined, socialist state. On the freezing night of January 15, 1966, they struck. Nzegu led troops to the lodge of Sir Ahmadu Bello in Kaduna, executing the powerful premier. In Lagos, Ife Ajuna abducted Prime Minister Tafawa Balewa, whose body was later found rotting by a roadside. In Ibadan, Samuel Akintola fought a terrifying gun battle with soldiers before being shot dead. The coup succeeded in killing the politicians, but the young majors failed to seize the government. Because the plotters were mostly Igbo, and the victims were overwhelmingly northern and western leaders, the coup was entirely misinterpreted as an ethnic takeover. It triggered a devastating chain reaction, a bloody northern counter-coup in July 1966. On July 29, 1966, northern military officers launched a bloody counter-coup. General Agui Ironsi was assassinated alongside his host, the western military governor Adekunle Fajuyi. In the chaos that followed, a young, consensus-building northern officer, Lieutenant Colonel Yakubu Gowon, was elevated to become the new head of state. But the military coup was followed by an even greater horror. Across the northern region, organized pogroms erupted. Tens of thousands of Igbo men, women and children were systematically massacred in waves of ethnic violence. Over 1 million traumatized refugees fled southward, packing into trains, trucks, and walking on foot, seeking shelter in their ancestral homeland of the eastern region. The military governor of the eastern region, Lieutenant Colonel Chukwuemeka Odumegu Ojukwu, watched his people bleed. He insisted that the federal government could no longer guarantee the basic safety of its eastern citizens. Despite last-minute peace talks in Aburi, Ghana, the diplomatic bridges had burned. On May 30, 1967, citing the systematic slaughter of his people and the collapse of the federal compact, Ojukwu stepped up to a microphone. He officially declared the secession of the Eastern region from the Federal Republic, renaming it the Independent Republic of Biafra. In July 1967, General Gowon ordered what he termed a short, sharp police action to crush the rebellion. He did not realize he had just opened the gateway to one of the bloodiest conflicts in modern African history. The Biafran War was a brutal mismatch. Backed by heavy artillery and military hardware from Great Britain and the Soviet Union, the Nigerian Federal Forces gradually pushed back the Biafran lines. But the defining tragedy of the war was not fought with bullets, it was fought with food. In 1968, the federal government enacted a total land, sea, and air blockade on the Biafran enclave. Starvation was explicitly deployed as a weapon of war. Images of hollowed-out children with swollen bellies shocked the global conscience, bringing the word kwashiorkor, severe malnutrition, into international headlines. For 2.5 agonizing years, the Biafrans fought with desperate, fanatical resistance. But by January 1970, the enclave was exhausted, starved of resources, and completely fractured. Recognizing that further resistance meant the total annihilation of his people, Ojukwu fled into exile to the Ivory Coast. He left his deputy, Major General Philip Effiong, to handle the endgame. On January 15, 1970, General Effiong stood before a microphone to broadcast the final, unconditional surrender. We are loyal Nigerian citizens and accept that the Republic of Biafra hereby ceases to exist. Flying to Lagos, Effiong handed the instrument of surrender to Colonel Olusegun Obasanjo, bringing the war to an official close. General Gowon famously declared a policy of no victor, no vanquished, launching a massive campaign of reconstruction, rehabilitation, and reconciliation. But the scars of the war ran deep. The conflict claimed over 100,000 military casualties and anywhere between 1 to 2 million civilian lives, mostly innocent children taken by starvation. When the Civil War ended, a dark irony consumed Nigeria. In the 1970s, the nation experienced a massive oil boom. Billions of petrodollars flooded the national treasury. But instead of developing the nation, this wealth became a curse. The military generals and political elites who won the war effectively captured the state. The historic pillars of the economy were completely abandoned. The massive groundnut pyramids of the north disappeared. The booming cocoa farms of the west were swallowed by the forest. The lucrative palm oil plantations of the east were ignored. Everyone turned their eyes to the federal center, waiting for free oil money to be distributed. This marked the beginning of Nigeria's absolute economic decay. A country that once fed itself became heavily dependent on imported food. The oil boom funded a massive kleptocracy. Successive military dictatorships throughout the 1980s and 90s looted the treasury with terrifying efficiency, hiding billions in Swiss bank accounts while the local infrastructure collapsed. The currency, once stronger than the American dollar, was repeatedly devalued through disastrous structural adjustment programs. The oil refineries were purposely left to rot by corrupt syndicates who profited massively from importing refined fuel back into the country. Today, the legacy of 1914 is stark. A nation endowed with the greatest human capital on the African continent, sitting on some of the largest reserves of crude oil and natural gas in the world, is trapped in a cycle of poverty, staggering foreign debts, and crumbling infrastructure. The amalgamation of Lord Lugard brought together a vast, powerful people, but the continuous plundering of its wealth by both colonial masters and its own native sons has left an open wound. The story of Nigeria is the story of incredible resilience in the face of staggering betrayal. A wealthy nation hollowed out from the inside, still waiting for the dawn of the promise it made to the world in 1960.